Good morning. Welcome to the ICT Educator Webinar Series. I'm Steve Wright, the Statewide Director for the Information Communications Technology Sector team. If you visit us on our website, you can see all our 10 regional directors of employer engagement and our support team. And there you'll see Nicole Sherman, who's the producer of this series. And thank you, Nicole, for putting this on and making sure everything works and is stored. Because you have this series to get the state-of-the-art, best information you would get if you went to a conference without having to leave where you are. And we store everything on our website, so you can see the videos and the PowerPoints and all the links, that kind of thing, and go back. Coming up in the near future right here, and I'm going to turn it over to Sean right now, because Sean's going to give us a little tip about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks, and then introduce Rich. Take it over, Sean.
Hey guys, Sean Monson. I'm the NETLAB user group lead for the community colleges in California. Welcome to our quarterly NETLAB user group meeting. It's now part of the ICT Educator Webinar series, as you see on the screen. Every Friday, we're bringing you timely topics intended to help keep you, the educators, up to date on the latest trends, technologies, related community college efforts, all of those kinds of things. That's a great webinar series. And again, thank Nicole for pulling those together for us. She's the heart of this effort. Specifically, would like to welcome you to join us for our next webinar 1 week from today. Laura Chappelle, I'm not sure if any of you know her. You might be familiar with her. She's a Wireshark guru, also a leading cybercrime instructor. And next week, she's going to share tips focusing on how to use Wireshark to detect network breaches and provide students with exercises to learn about network forensics. So if you're in that space, it's a really, really interesting webinar. So I hope you'll join us. You can go out to the ictdmsector.org, which is that website right there about the middle, upper middle of your page. And you can actually pre-register for the webinar. Also, if you zoom down to the bottom of that ICTDM sector page, there's a link there that you can sign up for our newsletters that come out, and you can keep up to date on all of the webinars as they come out. Let's see, this morning we have NDG with us. Rich Weeks and Thomas Koslov are here to talk about NETLAB. Specifically, they're going to be talking about kind of what's new with NETLAB, also talking about the new CCNA V7 content and what we'll need to do to teach that new curriculum in our NETLAB environments. And then any other topics that Rich feels is relevant and helpful to us. Thanks again, you guys, for joining us. Rich, I'm going to go ahead and turn the remainder of the time over to you.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. So let's see here. Share my screen. Can you confirm you can see my screen, guys?
Yes, we can.
All right, terrific. I think almost everybody on this webinar, so I'm very comfortable making this conversational. Sean and Nicole were so kind to give us the whole webinar. I don't know if we need the whole time, but we're willing to stay around. And I'm even comfortable staying afterwards after Nicole turns off the recording. So if anybody wants to ask questions, they're a little hesitant to ask them with the recording on, we'll stay around for a while, as long as Nicole can keep this open. Long story short, NDG's been around a little while, so you guys know us. We were actually founded in 1999 to do physical layer 1 switches and automation. Bunch of network engineers and project managers working in the telecom industry. And Cisco saw our work and we built NETLAB Plus. And many of you know NETLAB Plus is a product where you can host NETLAB, but we also have NETLAB set up now so it can be a node, and we can talk to that node through APIs. And we're building an academic cloud where we can basically do grid type computing, which is what a cloud is, and we can do things in a cloud format. Now, I'm real hesitant to push that model, and I'll share why. A lot of funding is very centric to universities or academic institutions, and often very centric to only their states. And it's very hard to sustain a cloud in a cost-effective way unless you get economy of scale. And it's very hard to get economy of scale unless you sell things in a big macro business model. So even though NDG can offer things as a service, what we find is when we offer things as an online lab service, online course service, we often don't even recoup the cost of sustaining it. And that's okay because the impact we make, but obviously we got to pay the people and we got to pay the services. And I'll be glad to answer questions about that. We do have a grant to deploy the academic cloud. We didn't receive the grant, a college and university, a community college and university did. We already have the cloud built and it's working very successful. And I'll share with you guys some things that we're working towards to try to sustain that as a business model. It's pretty exciting, same time a little scary. Also, I was asked if I'd share our online offerings. And I think when I was asked about that, they were thinking about lab services. I believe everyone knows us for NETLAB Plus to help host Cisco gear and then labs. So often they think of us as a lab company, but we've built an online platform that can host learning material as content, videos, virtual machines. You can use NetLab to pull in labs through an API call. Over the 20 years, we've diversified into many more offerings. The one thing I would describe us as is social impact. What do I mean by that? We have purposely stayed out of commercial training. We've been asked many times to offer commercial training. Even large corporations have asked us to support commercial training, and we've decided that we're going to stay in social impact, trying to help learners with no skills to build enough skills to get a job. So that's kind of a quick overview. I'll do my best to describe a lot of things we got going on. I don't know if I can cover everything, but I'll do my best. All right, if you look at our impact, 2018, it was around approximately 250,000 learners that we served. 2019 is somewhere between 280 and 300K. Now, the reason that there's a little bit of variance is there's a little bit of overlap that we're struggling to figure out how to isolate down to one learner. And I'm sure you're not surprised by this, with many of you being from California. We are very careful not to use user data in a way that'll get us in trouble with data laws. One of the biggest headaches we're having right now is the complexity associated with GDPR, California data laws, and individual state data laws, not because we can't honor them, but because we got to make sure our customers honor them too. And we got to anonymize anything that we receive so that we don't run afoul of data laws. So it makes it a little harder than people may think as a small social impact business to be able to count your numbers easily, especially when you're trying to make sure you anonymize everything. So we take pains to not run afoul of FERPA or to violate data laws. And it's getting harder because we do a lot of international work. And in these programs we support internationally, a lot of countries are starting to pop up what I would say are data laws aimed at forces businesses to move inside the boundary of that country. Now, all this may sound like it's irrelevant to what we do, help you teach technology, but I'm really stressed with you, it makes it very heavy financially as you try to figure out how to deal with, maybe you got customers coming from Europe or customers coming from Russia or Australia, and it just gets heavier and heavier as you try to lower the cost of ownership for everybody, but not run afoul of any of these potential data laws. With that said, it's going very well for us, obviously. 280 to 300,000 people impacted in 2019 is something I think we can be proud of. We do this by partnering with really good companies. I would say in this space, a company that I believe does the best job on pedagogy is the Cisco Networking Academy. Their pedagogy is outstanding. You can take somebody with zero knowledge, and by the time you're done with a couple of classes, as you all know, you're employable. So we love working with Cisco. Cisco's also been very gracious by allowing us to put NDG developed Linux content and Linux virtual machine in their LMS to let anybody that wants to learn open source to learn Linux. And that has been a big boon. In fact, I'm meeting with Linux Professional Institute right after this webinar so that we can try to figure out how to help more people learn Linux. So Cisco Network Academy has been excellent to work with. Linux Professional Institute is a nonprofit. They're based in Canada. They are a certification organization, but they're a membership entity. So anyone that wants to be an open source Linux Professional Institute does a really good job of trying to help people document their skills and then join a membership group. And they're moving on to things like DevOps and cybersecurity and open source areas other than Linux. So we hope to align to some of the other offerings they have over time. Red Hat Academy probably doesn't need any kind of exposure because at this point, hopefully you're aware of it. If you want to expand your knowledge in open source and then document enterprise knowledge of Linux and open source, Red Hat Academy has excellent content, not just Linux, but they also have things around cloud and automation. So really good program. Palo Alto Network Cybersecurity Academy has not only embraced the academic community at the vocational high school, community college, and university, which a lot of our partners focus on, but they have a program now called ACES, and we're trying to support these programs. It goes all the way down to like a 6-year-old, K5 all the way to K12, K to 12, pardon me, to high school. The reason we really like that is recently, this week actually, I was at a conference supporting Tribal Nation, and they're working really hard to get broadband into tribal nations. There are lots of places, even in the US, and these tribal nations that don't have broadband. And once they get it up and running, a program like Cyber ACES, supported by Palo Alto, can come in and help them learn cybersecurity when they had no exposure at all, and then start something in a STEM program right away, very early in the learning process with those students. So that's just one of many examples. VMware IT Academy, I like this program a lot, and I'll tell you why. It helps a lot of universities we work with. One of the slides I have is a research university we're working with. They're doing high-speed network. You might have saw it if you went to the the WASTC conference that Karen and Richard run. Professor was there on high-speed networks. He's using VMware to be able to run virtual machines and then do testing on high-speed networks. VMware's vSphere hypervisor is very advanced, and the fact that they give that hypervisor to schools around the world, that's a pretty big deal. I really like their program for that alone. Now, with that said, we've built a lot of content for them, and I think everybody's aware of that. One of their challenges was their stuff is very high-end, and learning about a hypervisor or cloud computing is an entry-level knowledge base we need to support, so we built some stuff for that, content for that. The other item, I'm pursuing a nonprofit, and it's turned out to be a royal pain in the tushy. I wish I didn't pursue a nonprofit. We have a nonprofit built, and I will share openly with anyone that'll listen. It is scary as heck to run a small social impact business that has had profit and then try to file paperwork that says you're going to be a nonprofit, because you can create a tax obligation for the people that have built the business where they receive no benefit but tax obligation. So let me just share with you, we are being extremely cautious and careful in working with lawyers. Our intent in doing this, and I hope no one's offended by this, our stuff needs to be as close to free as possible. We've always known this. The way we've sustained in the sector is to ask those that can afford our products to share with those that could not afford our products. Now that we're moving to a model where everybody wants to log in as a service, we believe the best model would be if we could pursue grants just like our partners do, customers, a community college or university, so that we can build some of the things we build and then offer it for free. And I'll have many examples of things we're doing for free to try to make an impact to help beginning learners, community colleges, and university learners. All right, so that gives you a quick overview of who we are. Hopefully you'll have a good feel for this and you appreciate what we're trying to accomplish. With that shared, we know we don't get everything right. We're here to learn too. There's things that we're working on that we need to improve, and we value feedback and assistance to learn how we can do a better job. Okay, NetLab Plus. I think that NetLab Plus is a not well understood product sometimes. The goal of NetLab Plus is to put an academic institution in control of their lab, but allow the lab to be on the internet. NetLab Plus is often spoken of as if it's an aggregated product. It is not. It's a software management solution designed to manage a lab. Now, how does it manage a lab? Anyone can build whatever they want on a virtual machine. The challenge becomes is how are you going to scale that virtual machine, i.e. not just service a classroom of students, but hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of learners. We're all familiar that hypervisors have made cloud computing possible. Cloud computing is just using somebody else's computer. NETLAB is trying to manage VMware vSphere to allow an instructor to use virtual machines and then marry it to content so you can teach specific learning elements, learning exercises. Now, you could argue that NETLAB doesn't need to be around anymore. But what I would encourage you to do is go do your homework on certain thick VMs. Does everybody know the difference between thick and thin VM? If not, send me a chat. A thick VM eats up a lot of compute resources. When you try to put that in a cloud or a cloud service, it can get very expensive when you scale it to a couple hundred students. In fact, I've heard huge price tags thrown around. You can pay for the servers you're using in the cloud. Now, this is why NETLAB continues to be valued. We have many customers that they do the math and they go, we just can't get it in the cloud yet. At the price points, we can do it with NETLAB. Well, of course, we know this too because we consume out of the cloud and many of our offerings are offered out of the cloud. NETLAB is trying to aggregate many programs as we can and help a school lab manager put those programs on the internet and to teach things that have heavy virtual machines like vSphere. When you teach vSphere, you've got to eat up a lot of compute resources. If you were to put that on a server in the cloud, you would have to dedicate the servers to the classrooms of students you're serving, and you would basically pay for those servers in 3 to 6 months. So why not take those servers and still make them available? So that is the concept of NETLAB Plus. Now, we originally built NETLAB Plus purely for the Cisco Networking Academy. In 1999, Cisco asked us if we could build NETLAB to host Cisco gear. About 14 years ago, VMware asked us if we could add to it virtualization, and it has expanded and expanded. Now we use NETLAB as a node in our own academic cloud I was describing, but schools are still using NETLAB to share resources. Now there's lots of things you can do behind NETLAB, including create your own custom labs. Now, believe it or not, in 2018, I had the numbers. I don't know the numbers for 2019. There were about 40,000 learners served with custom labs that instructors had created behind their own NETLAB systems. Now, these were labs that we weren't distributing to anyone. Somebody just built the labs on their own to serve their students. So it has pretty big impact on custom. Other labs are things where we're partnering with somebody to distribute the labs to these NETLAB systems or host them ourselves in MDG Online, where we often use NETLAB or we use a cloud if it's a thin VM, or the VM won't cost a lot of money to put in the cloud. So right now, we're working on Cisco Networking Academy, CCNA 1, 2, and 3 for version 7. Now, this can be really heavy. Let me explain. The Cisco Networking Academy equipment has evolved over 20 years. A Cisco router may not boot as fast as it used to boot. A Cisco router may also not be designed for this type of pedagogy. So we have to write scripts to automate and manage that router, as we did in 2000, 2007. Every time Cisco comes out with new equipment and a new lab library, obviously, we have to try to manage that equipment to add it behind NETLAB. One of the biggest challenge comes in the process is regression testing, because many schools want to use equipment that is very old. It might even be 3 or 4 curriculum revisions back, and they still want to use that equipment. In some cases, the equipment is viable. In other cases, the equipment will no longer support the lab content. So it becomes extremely hard because obviously we want to help the schools and we know they have limited budgets. So we might be carrying very old equipment and schools may be asking very old equipment to work. So this becomes a real challenge. Now for CCNA 1 and 2, we're done with the QA testing and those labs are getting ready to come out. 3, we just finished, Thomas Koslob's on here, and we'll pull up the slides and spend time talking to you guys, let you ask us questions about the labs. But the CCNA 1 through 3 labs, it used to be a 4th course also, they're getting ready to come out from NDG. Now, obviously, we're lagging behind when Cisco announced. They announced last month, I think it was. We're always going to lag a little behind our vendor partners until we have the final version of the labs. Now, I have one other example on here, and that's the I think it's California Community College System. I don't know what the CCO stands for. Forgive me for not knowing. But a gentleman named Steve Lithcom funded through Moraine Valley to create some labs for the CompTIA CY SA+. We reviewed those labs and we thought, hey, since it's Creative Commons, can we have permission to redo the labs, edit them, add to them? And we produced a version of that same lab library that Steve funded, using our own budget to improve some areas. And we've released that lab library out and is available in your NetLab system. Palo Alto recently opened up their version 9 to academia. We just released version 9 for their first firewall PCNSE level course. We're also working really hard to get Windows out of any pod we can. So for Palo Alto has some entry cybersecurity type introduction lab content. We're working hard to get Windows out of those pods. If anybody wants to know why, I can kind of go into detail. But if you've ever dealt with Windows licensing headaches, you're probably cheering at this moment as you hear we're getting that out of these pods, and we're trying to look where we can get them out others. What we did for the Palo Alto ones to replace Windows, we're adding a Linux operating system version called Mint, and it looks like whatever you tell it to look like. You can make it look like Linux, you can make it look like a Mac, you can make it look like Windows. We wanted to play with that because that's got a lot of potential when you don't have to match the operating system exactly, because you can use open source and remove some of the headaches that our school customers may face. And we can host more things with open source than we can with intellectual property that has license rules around it. We have to be very careful not to violate license rules in these models because it could get very expensive, obviously. All right, we recently came out with vSphere ICM and ONS 6.7. That's going to be good for several semesters, but I anticipate VMware will come out with vSphere 7 training in the next 3 to 6 months, so we'll be trying to support that. And then I've got another example for you of some labs that were produced in a grant project by Professor Krashenko that I mentioned earlier. And they are for more high-speed networks, which is becoming a bigger deal in the marketplace and will continue to. All right, so those are some examples I have. We can get into other items. Let's talk about the Cisco, because Sean asked us to spend some time on it. All right, Thomas is here, and he can answer questions, and I'll pause here and let you guys ask us questions. Well, what I'll share is Cisco has kind of upgraded their lab library model. They're using Packet Tracer for the majority of the learning elements, which is great because obviously Packet Tracer can scale and do things you can't do if you require the hard equipment in front of you. Packet Tracer is a simulator. Still want to support the real gear for a lot of good reasons, and we'll continue to support it from NetLab so that a school can share. Our hope is a community college or university will set up the real gear and share it with community colleges and high schools that can't afford the real gear, i.e. giving access to hands-on real gear through NetLab when it makes sense. But Packet Tracer is the preferred way to do the Cisco Networking Academy labs because the simulation will scale. And then there's tools that Cisco's adding into Packet Tracer. With that said, we want to continue with this model. Instead of having 3 routers and 3 switches and then breaking combinations for that, moving forward, what we'll have is 2 routers and 2 switches. And I compliment the Cisco team because I think they're trying to be cost effective, lower the expenses a school may have to buy this equipment. Now, the first release from NDG supports this specific pod with the current recommended equipment. So if you were to start using NetLab with the latest pod, you would need the 2 routers and 2 switches recommended by the Cisco team for the Cisco Networking Academy, and it would look exactly like this in the pod. Now, All 3 lab libraries, CCNA 1, 2, and 3, will be supported by this pod design. And Thomas is deploying an installation guide, like we always do with setups, to tell you how to deploy these new pods. And Thomas, do you have a date for when that installation guide will be ready, Thomas?
Yeah, so CCNA 1 through 3, just want to clarify that it's ready to be released, and I'm planning to release it sometime next week. Just right now, just doing some final touches on the designs, and then working on the install guide as well today, actually, spending some time on that. So my hope is to have everything ready to go sometime next week. So.
All right. Thomas, the number one question I've seen come to our support help desk is, hey, can I run the labs on my old equipment pod? And the answer is the first release of the labs are designed to work with exactly how Cisco has designed it. Is that an accurate statement?
That's correct, yeah.
Future versions, we're going to try to do regression testing to see if we can help schools by making older things work. But at this time, we are not aware of a Cisco commitment for making older equipment or older pod designs work. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, very good.
So what does that mean, Rich?
So what that means is we're kind of on our own, either NDG or the community, to get old equipment and see how far we can go with old equipment. And that's not because Cisco's being difficult, it's because they're encouraging people to use Packet Tracer. Does that answer your question on what it means, Sean?
Well, yeah, I guess, so really kind of the core of my question is around the lab content itself and how that is going to change or align with the new CCNA curriculum that's been rolled out. As you probably know, all of the modules, CCNA 1, CCNA 2, CCNA 3, have new content and new labs associated with them. Just really kind of interested to find out what the plan is to update the NETLAB labs in accordance with the new CCNA lab changes.
So if you've got the last revision of equipment and this current release, the labs that we're releasing for NETLAB will work. If you've got older equipment that goes back like 2 revisions or further, we're going to have to regression test and then come up with new lab content aligned to those older pods. Does that make sense, Sean?
It does.
And there's no way to solve it other than just pure brute force labor. And the question starts to become at a certain point, and I'll show you other things we're working on. What does our community want? You know, how they want to drag, like how far back do we try to go with our labor to regression test older gear? Or do we keep working on some of the other projects that we're investing in? So it's a budget exercise and just pure labor.
Well, I think what might be helpful is to know, so for the new labs that are included in the new curriculum, when are those labs going to be reflected in the NetLab content? And maybe what might be helpful is an analysis of what, how far back can you go and still do the, in other words, depending on how old your equipment is in your NetLab environment, what's the minimum configuration needed to be able to do the new labs? And then people can look at their current equipment and say, hey, we're going to need to update these switches, or we're going to need to update these routers, or whatever. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, Sean, and I got to walk a fine line. Here's the fine line. Cisco's already done what you're proposing. They've already stated what equipment they recommend for the labs, and that's got to be the standard supported model for their curriculum. It's their curriculum. Regression testing to old equipment becomes a challenge. Now, it's risky to say, hey, how far are you going to go back? You go all the way to the 2700s and try to make every lab work? And that's what you'll have a large amount of the community is going to want to go as far back as you can. There's even people dragging 2500s and 2600s around in their program. And obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense at some point to try to make all the current released equipment that Cisco is requiring for their curriculum to be supported while you go all the way that far back. And I understand why you're asking the questions, but obviously this is the tightrope I got to walk, Sean. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Thanks.
And I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to be transparent. And I don't think Cisco's being difficult. I think they're just trying to help you teach what they know the marketplace needs your student to learn, and they need the school to have a pretty modern device. And I think Cisco's doing it really well because they're encouraging packet tracer, which will give you the learning pedagogy you need. Now, a lot of experts are on this call, and we can continue chatting in great detail. We might want to come back to this topic when we cover some other cool things I got to share. But that's where we're at. Tom, do you want to add anything to that? Tom Koslab?
Not really. You said it pretty well. Ultimately, we're just trying to, match Cisco's curriculum, and the way they wrote the labs this time around for version 7 is taking into consideration the interfaces for the new equipment, So that's how the labs are written. That's what we're going for with the new equipment recommendations. And just like you said, we're going to explore options, seeing how far back can we go to see if like older gear, like 1941 routers, possibly 1921 routers, that could be feasible for the new labs. It's just that there's some different interface translations going to those routers compared to the new ones. So.
All right, got some really good questions coming at me, and I'm going to try to answer and address a few of them, but let's move forward. Here's the lab library from the context of the real gear. These are the labs that Cisco has identified to use real gear to complete. Now, we've asked Cisco if we can add additional labs that'll work in the real gear, which means we'll take labs that were just written for packet tracer and make them work with the real gear. But these are the labs that are designed for real gear exercises out the gate in the pedagogy, in the curriculum, the teaching model. Now, Cisco has a lot of good reasons. I'm sure they're encouraging the other labs to be done in packet tracer, and I'll defer to the Cisco content team. As I said earlier, believe Cisco does the best job engaging a student from zero knowledge and building them up. And I think packet tracer is an excellent tool. So I would encourage schools, if you got access to a NetLab, make sure students can play with real gear. If you don't have access to the real gear, you definitely can do it on packet tracer and get through the labs. And we all know the pitfalls, and we could be in a long discussion about the real thing versus the simulation. I don't want to engage in this call on that discussion, though I've had it many times over a beer or stronger alcohol with many people. Okay, so there's a couple questions that have been popped up. I won't call out who asked them, but these are good questions. I was asked about Microsoft and NDG forming a partnership. If anybody on this call knows a vice president or higher, it needs to probably be a vice president, who can really talk to us and understand the academic model, the licensing, and has the oomph to help us partner to solve some of these problems we're doing with other companies, we'll fly to that vice president. Now, I don't want a phone call. I don't want an online meeting. I will fly, and I'll hang out if it takes 3 days for 1 hour. It's worth trying to solve that problem. Person sent the message, said, can NDG and Microsoft partner to solve some of the same problems? I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, can I support the labs that are in Moab because they were frustrated with XYZ? I would gladly do that if I could. So if somebody knows someone, please introduce them to me and ask for a face-to-face meeting. Another question that was asked was, how will this impact the CCNA security pods? I don't know what's going to happen with this CCNA security content. I'll defer to the Cisco content team. The old security content will continue to be supported. We're waiting on the CCNP labs, and I'm not sure how Cisco's going to move forward with CCNA security. So I can't answer that question. I would have to defer to someone on the Cisco content team. And again, they're very good at studying what they should teach to help your students get jobs. And I would wait for that outcome. I'm sorry I can't answer that further.
Hello, Rich.
Yeah,
This is
please,
Steve.
go ahead.
Really what I was asking is, currently we have the security and CCNA 1, 2, 3 all in the same lab pod format. Obviously, this creates a challenge. If we're going to do CCNA 1, 2, 3, we basically are occupying all that physical real estate with, the other router configuration and this. I don't quite understand all the ins and outs of the NetLab environment, so I don't know what's possible or not possible with flexibility of pod configuration for two different models in the same rack space.
Yeah, great question. I understand the question now, Steve. So what we did was once we had all of the Cisco content for past versions, we would look at the total aggregated lab content and all the lab exercises and try to design one pod that would allow you to teach as much content as possible. So what I would say, Steve, is what you're asking is, can we get to a point where we have one pod to teach as much curriculum as possible? And the answer is, when we have all the content that may come out that uses real gear, we're going to try to do that. It's on our roadmap to try to pull that off again. But until we have CCNP and any other thing designed to work with real gear, we have to wait for the labs. Does that make sense, Steve?
It does. It just presents obviously a real estate challenge as much as anything else, trying to support the two curriculums, and we don't have any more space, so that becomes the obviously, and the money to move over to the other.
Yeah. In fact, I just sent an email to one of my Cisco contacts when I was meeting with a tribal nation, and the perception is often that Cisco is expensive to teach because you need the real gear, or you have to pay for some other services, when in reality, I think Cisco is very economic to teach. It's just you have to make a business decision if you want to set up real gear or not. And that's where NetLab is designed to try to create aggregation where somebody can afford a NetLab, they'll set it up and then share with others. That's the intent. But I understand the challenge, Steve. And my only answer is, until we have all the content, we really can't define a different pod. We just have to map what Cisco is recommending. And the question about, will it include an ASA firewall? Not this release of this set of labs do not include an ASA. The older will still be around, and it does include an ASA. All right, I got a lot of other cool things to show, but I know this is one that was important. Any other questions? All right, terrific. All right, so let's go a little faster because I got a lot of stuff I want to share with you. This lab library I think is really good, and it's great that Steve was able to get some funding, and it's also great he did it under Creative Commons. We were able to add some content and modify the content because it was under Creative Commons. If you have a NetLab system, you can set this pod up, and it's a very good lab library to expose your students to. All right, I'm going to jump into the online portal. So one of the things that a lot of folks want is to consume as a service, and we realize this. So a lot of the things that you would do in NetLab, we can offer as a service. There's certain things that we can't do. For example, I will not host a Microsoft Windows desktop. I know of companies that do. I am not saying they are not doing something they shouldn't. I personally have not figured out how to do that on the licensing side. I know how to make a Microsoft Windows server that I can host look like a client, but I can't teach everything you might with a client. So you as an academic institution have rights that commercial companies don't have. I've said it over and over again. I will be very cautious not to do something that I think is not licensed. I don't know how to license a desktop as a service. With that shared, I can teach all kinds of content as a service. For example, with VMware IT Academy, we now have 3 micro courses that you can add to your own LMS. You could put it in the California LMS if California wanted to teach the basics of cloud concepts, network virtualization, and software-defined storage. Now, these all have a VMware flavor. There are many products out there that you can do cloud with. There's many products you can do network virtualization or software-defined networks, and the same thing for software storage. VMware has been very good to us and the schools, and they have very good products that are very popular with Fortune 500. Therefore, we created these out of our own budget with VMware's permission, so that you could teach these concepts and add it to any course. They are designed to be one chapter in a course. Now, we can let you use LTI and add that to your to your offerings. By LTI, first of all, can you confirm you see my browser? Can you see my browser? Okay,
Yes,
Steve
we can.
said, thank you. All right, so if you want, you can come to our Cloud Invert course right off our website, and you can say, hey, I'm a learner, and you can roll right into this course. It's free to anybody in the world, very popular already. Or you can say, I'm an instructor, and at that point, you can say you want to enroll as a learner, or you can take the steps to add it to your own learning management system. And we are not stopping anyone from adding it to their LMS. In other words, if you want to use the content, just use it, and we will host it for you. But to your student, it will look like it's in your LMS. Now, the student will have to register only once with us so we can support them, but we don't do anything with the data other than ask for to verify they're a real student, and how do we support them? What's your email address so we can respond if you have a support issue? You can do this with any of our content that you have a right to, that we're hosting, and the rules will allow you to. For example, I can't allow you to do it with my Linux courses because I'm doing that through Cisco's channel, and that costs Cisco a lot of budget. So I don't want to bypass Cisco because they're investing and they need to have aggregation. So I get a lot of requests, can I put Linux in my LMS? Technically, the answer would be yes, but for business reasons, we ask you to use Cisco because it does cost money and they're covering that cost, and it scales quicker. So this is a nice addition, in my opinion, because a lot of our instructors would like to build content as a chapter or a module or a lab as an exercise, library of labs in their own LMS or the state LMS, and you can do that with this model. I hope that's exciting for you. We're getting great feedback on that. Now, this does assume you have the rights to use LTI to add it into your content. But if you go to check out our website, the online content, you can add to your own LMS. We put a lot of work in trying to make it easier for you to teach things and to scale. All right, so those are 3 new offerings that I'm excited about. Now, the Cloud Invert course also has PowerPoint slide decks. We've built a little website that you can go to that has PowerPoints that you can download. So all the lecture material is already built into Cloud Invert. All right, there's the website. So if you go to ndg.tech/VMware, and let's see, do I have my chat up? Yes, I'll put that in here. You can go there to either enroll in the course or to download PowerPoints. You go to our main site to add it to your LMS. Hopefully these 3 courses are liked. I don't know if anybody's used them, but if you could come back and share that you've used it, I would really appreciate your feedback on one of these courses, if you like them. All right. Our Linux courses, these have been around for a long time now, but we recently updated all the courses. Linux Unhatched was updated first. We tried to rewrite it so you could use it with CCNA CyberOps, because a lot of cybersecurity courses require a lot of knowledge of Linux. So we added a lot of commands so you could get through CyberOps, but it's also good for other cybersecurity courses. Linux Essentials has been updated to map to the new certificate from Linux Professional Institute. Linux 1 and Linux 2, same thing, been updated for the LPIC 1 exam. It used to be that CompTIA Linux Plus was the exact same exam as the LPIC 1 from LPI. It was actually just white labeled, i.e. it was the same exam but done by Linux Professional Institute. I think it was CompTIA Linux Plus powered by LPI would have been the branding. Now Linux Plus is 1 exam, 1 course. We're not supporting Linux Plus, we support LPIC 1. It's a lot more curriculum, but I believe you get a much more rounded Linux professional because they're exposed to a lot more and they're asked to prove knowledge of a lot more. So we are supporting the LPIC 1 certification. Now, the content is obviously designed so that you go to Cisco Academy and then you can teach it to anyone. What we see is most popular is probably Linux Essentials, followed by Linux Unhatched. The Linux 1, Linux 2 is popular, but not where as near as just the basic Linux material, Linux Unhatched Essentials. The Linux, oh, thank you. Michael just pointed out I didn't send the ndg.tech to everyone. I apologize. I'll resend that. Here's the VMware content. I meant to send it to everyone. I apologize. I sent it privately. Someone asked the question. Thank you very much, Michael. It's in your inbox now, or in the chat, pardon me. All right, so Linux Unhatched, why I really like this content is it helps you progress into other harder material if you know nothing about Linux, keep up with your peers. But if you are getting ready to go to an interview, you could really study it over a weekend and then impress upon your employers that you know enough about Linux to get by, to get started. So I really like Linux Unhatched to help a student out. All right, there's another module that I want to share with you. We're getting a lot of positive feedback on these short little learning modules. And I'm looking into creating a lot of security awareness modules that can be used by academia and then just in general. A lot of small businesses need education around security, and I think if schools had these modules, it would help them help small businesses in their community. Here's one that we created as an example. This is designed to teach you what a password is. It's really just a hash, and everybody thinks, you know, you get hacked only because it's a simple password or it's too simple. That is a reason, and it's a big problem, but often not for why people think. All these hashes are with really big companies or organizations like NDG that have web services, and you log in with your username and password. But when those hashes get stolen out of a database, a expert, or really not an expert, just could even be a teenager to just learn Linux and knows how to download software, can crack your password. And we walk you through scenarios where your passwords are basically cracked, and then we give you a Linux virtual machine, and we show you an example of how that password is cracked and let you crack some passwords. Now, our intent is not to turn a bunch of teenagers or individuals into hackers. Obviously, our intent is to get people to understand it's not rocket scientists that are cracking and getting access to your phone or something else. You really need to use two-factor authentication, and you need to use complex passwords because the software can actually crack your password really quick. And we want to see how easy it is to do that. And we give several scenarios. Now, I'm asking people to pilot test this module because I want to know, is this the kind of stuff you want to put in front of those that you serve in your communities and you think this is valuable? Long story short, if it is, we're going to try to produce more of these modules. And this gets down to how do we invest our budget and where do we make an impact. If you're interested in that module, you can just enroll in an LMS we host and you can try it out. I know that's a long URL, so I will type it here. And I would love to get you to try it out and give me feedback if you like this type of module. Now I've got to figure out what channel to put it in, host it myself from the NDG perspective, or just offer it to one of our partner that has a large LMS and a large channel. But love to get your feedback. In fact, if you don't mind sending me chat messages, if you like the concept of that little security password module, lets any student realize that hackers are not geniuses, they're just using some software, and anybody can hack you if they've got a software package and know a little bit of Linux. I would love to get your feedback on that concept. Oh, thank you, Al. I appreciate the private note. So anybody send me comments on this material. It helps me know, where you stand, what you think there's value in. All right, I've got several other things before I go into the grant project that I want to share with you. As I mentioned earlier, NDG made a business decision to be social impact. We have a program that we're supporting. It's called Girls Go Cyber Start. This is actually run by SANS Institute. They came to us with a problem. A lot of high schools are asked if they'd like to participate in it. It's a high school program for girls. Long story short, a lot of schools can't participate in the competition because they lock their learning environments down. The computers are locked down so tight that they can't do the things in the competition. Like they can't download a file, they can't set up a virtual machine, they just can't participate. So we built a gym that allows any high school whose firewall administrator blocks support or they won't let them do it, they can log in through a web browser, like a Google Chrome machine with a web browser, and then they can participate in this competition. Now, we don't receive any budget for doing this. SANS is not getting, but it's just us trying to make a difference and get more people interested in technology. My hope is that we can earn a better relationship with companies that are building cybersecurity material on a high-end basis, like introduction to cybersecurity, high-end skills, SANS does a lot of that work. If they'll develop a really good relationship with SANS, maybe they'll work with us to get more things into academia like this and more teaching pedagogies into academia. So I share this with you. If you're a high school instructor and you've got a lot of girls you want to get interested in cybersecurity, you may want to visit our site, check this out, learn more about that program from SANS. It's a really good little competition. And again, a lot of schools couldn't participate because their high school was locked down so tightly. So we built this nice little service for it. Hopefully that will be valued by the community, the high school community. All right. I covered the password module. I shared with the VMware site. I shared the VMware courses, just going through, make sure I covered. I don't know if I gave you a detail of an online portal. Sean wanted me to share with you that many things you do in NetLab, if you don't have a NetLab system, you can use it from us as a service. Now, you can see here to the left, I've got all kinds of topics that are covered. If we can host it for you, we're trying to host it. Again, license is one thing I have to worry about as a barrier, and then the rights to the content's another. But we're trying to host as many things as we can as a service. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, why would I want to do this? Or why would I want to keep my NetLab, you know, both directions? Well, the nice thing about NetLab is once you stand it up, like if your students are economically challenged, they're not paying us as a service, they're just using it. So if you get a grant that funds NetLab, the students aren't paying fees, they're just doing all these labs we push out to the NetLab systems. Or if you can share with other schools, we like that. I know that sounds crazy. You'd think we'd be all about how do we generate the revenue. We actually just want to sustain and help as many people as we can. Don't get me wrong, we want to make a good living, but we want to sustain. If your NetLab system can do it, it's free to your learner, or unless you charge them a lab fee. We hope it's free. In many cases, you can get a grant to fund that NetLab system, and then students don't have the cost that they may have if they do it directly to NDG, because we're going to have to charge you for these services. All right. Cisco Network Academy, I mentioned that we've got all the lab exercises in the Cisco Network Academy for the Linux courses, and all of them are updated. I'll pause here and see if anybody has questions before I move on, because I'm running out of time. Anybody got a question about the NDG Online offerings?
So Rich, just quickly, to give you some insight, we're having, in our region, the reason the online offerings have value for many of our community colleges is that A, it takes a lot of money to be able to stand up a NetLab environment in the first place. That's sometimes easier to do than the ongoing cost to maintain the facility, if you know what I mean. And in our region specifically, we're having some issues around kind of the ongoing management and maintenance costs for the equipment. So from our perspective, it's helpful if we can push those costs to our students maybe on a subscription type basis, where we don't have to go out to the region and try and find funding every few years to keep running our facilities, if that makes sense.
Yep, I'll share with you, and other lab providers, and there are other companies out there, may not agree with this statement, but I've been doing this a long time. A lot of the things that I'm hosting here, Sean, I don't generate positive cash flow from the context. It costs more to host it than the revenue that it gets generated. So that's a challenge. The reason that's a challenge is for obvious reasons. We're paying real expenses. So long story short, I have NetLab customers that tell me, hey, don't quit supporting NetLab because my grant tours is funding it and they love the outcomes. Then I have schools like yours that are saying, hey, we don't want to run it anymore. Will you do it as a service? And we are trying to do it as a service. But I will share with you, Sean, you don't see as many people order as you would guess. I hope that makes sense, Sean. In other words, we often get told, hey, if you build it, we'll fund it. And guess what? Not everything you build, because they say that they'll buy from you, they buy enough of it to sustain it. I hope that makes sense, Sean.
It does. Just keep in mind that it, in the community college system, it's a big ship, and oftentimes takes a long time to get the course of that ship changed.
Oh, I trust me. I've been supporting community colleges for 20 years, so you don't have to convince me. It takes a long time to get adoption. We see courses that have been around for 18 months get adopted at a very high rate compared to something that's been around like 3 months to 6 months. So we know it takes a long time to get in the syllabus. The problem that I see is if you don't have a sugar daddy, like somebody that'll give you a grant like National Science Foundation or a state, and you have to capitalize it. And I hear this all the time. Even Steve asked me a few years to do this. Hey, if you capitalize it and build it, we'll pay for it. Got to tell you, man, that's a surefire way not to be around to serve the people that you serve. You get your expenses greater than your budget, and you're not going to be around. That's the big thing that scares me after 20 years. You got to invest very wisely. And obviously, I'm on a recording and I'm saying it. I've been in the sector 20 years and I'm doing my best to sustain a lot of different offerings that are loss leaders. Industry's term for when they do something knowing they're going to lose money on it. I hope that's helpful, but it's as transparent as I can be. All right. Any other questions about NDG Online? Okay. Can you guys give me some feedback? Do you like the work that you see us working on? Is this good stuff? The cloud invert, the password module, the labs that Sean's asking us to host. I'm even comfortable. Give me feedback like, hey, Rich, you're full of it. Like, you should build it because it's going to get paid for. I'll gladly take that feedback and we can have a meeting and discuss it. I'd also work with you on grants. I'm more than willing to work with grants to try to help you get funding, and then let's do things. Okay, thanks everybody for the kind words, the private ones and the public ones. Thank you. All right, great. So let me go on to another example, and it's more grant driven. So in this case, we did have a grant, and I'm hoping it'll make an impact. I don't think all schools will teach this material. We helped the University of South Carolina to try to scale something that was designed to do research at first and teach like Internet 2 network engineers at universities. Pardon me. When we were doing the work, we were very interested if we could also get this in the hands of community colleges or maybe Cisco networking academies, from the context that high-speed networks are going to be a bigger and bigger deal in industry. Financial institutions are already conscious of this. In fact, how big the pipe is and the speed of the pipe can make a difference on winning on transactions in the financial industry. So one of the things about when you're doing high-speed network, if you just get a little bit of jitter on the line, you can end up with huge packet loss. So if you're doing high-speed large file transfer and you just have a little bit of an error rate or a little bit of jitter, you can see your performance just go to nothing. So it's really important to train engineers, especially at research tier 1 universities, on these issues around high-speed networks, as the federal government wants to see more high-speed networks between research universities. I think example I was given was a Clemson University professor presented. He's doing biology research. I think it was on the genome. And the files were petabytes, and he wanted to transfer those to other researchers. And think about transferring files that big. They want the high-speed networks because more innovation and research and data can be shared. And obviously, as our pipes need to get bigger and bigger at our homes and everywhere else, these high-speed networks become a bigger deal. Steve's probably nodding his head from his days at the telco, designing things and working with organizations using big pipes. So the pipes are going to get bigger and bigger, and the networks need to be faster and faster. Sonar is a product that measures performance, and you can look at what your performance is. I was just at a networking conference, and they were actually teaching workshops on this. And we have workshops that those engineers doing like Internet 2 type level learning, Internet 2 being the high-speed network among the research universities and the telcos and others working on it. They could train an engineer on these type of topics, and obviously NETLAB can help them scale and do that, and many of the resources are pretty high end from an expense perspective. Same thing with Zeek Bro intrusion detection. They're using this on those high-speed networks and exposing the engineers to intrusion detection topics. This is an example of a lab library that was funded by a research grant, and we're going to make these available to the NETLAB community. Thomas, I think you're pretty close to releasing the high-speed network protocol lab and then the Bro lab. Is that correct, Thomas?
High-speed networks is ready to be released. Just needs to be distributed. And the perf sonar and Zeek intrusion detection labs, we're still kind of going back and forth right now on finalizing those. But I am happy to say that those two labs, perf sonar and Zeek, first started out with internet requirements, and now we've got them both to be without internet.
Sandbox, you sandboxed both?
Yes.
Congratulations, Thomas, because that'll make it a lot easier for schools that want to host it versus have it hosting. That's great. Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I'm going to stop here. I just covered a lot of material. You may or may not have interest in this depending on what you do. I would say your students that learn networking from Cisco Networking Academy, this is a great additional resource to put a really motivated student against, because if they're near a university, the odds are it'd be a great opportunity for their career. Or if they want to put high-speed network type language on their resume, it definitely puts them in a different kind of category. Is this something you're interested in? I know many might not be able to get this in your syllabus, but you may use it as extra material. If you give me feedback on that, it would be great appreciated. Yeah, Nicole, I'll be glad to share the slide deck. No problem. All right. Anybody got any feedback? Is this high-speed type network stuff that came out of a research project at a research university, is this valuable? No comments on it? Okay, a couple people are interested. Okay, that's good. We thought that this might be something, somebody's a networking instructor, Cisco Network Academy. They may want to challenge up their better students, or they might even run an advanced networking class with some of it. There are some books that you can grab that are on the higher end, you know, high-speed networks, etc. All right, I just covered a lot of material. I blah, blah, blah on for almost an hour. Anybody got any additional questions that haven't been asked?
Rich, it's amazing listening to you talk and going through all this detail. A lot of it goes over my head, I hate to say. I know the practitioners who are on the webinar probably know it in much greater detail, but I can certainly appreciate the complexity and the various directions that you're pulled, the licensing issues and the scale and trying to find the right size pipes and making all that work out. It's a three-dimensional chess, and we certainly appreciate what you're doing, and we love to put you in a position where we can get help or probably help with grants. If there's anything you want to float in front of the community here in terms of what you think might be a good statewide grant or whatever, we'd be happy to put that out there and ask for colleges if they wish to participate in that and sign on. There's lots of things that we can do from a statewide perspective to help you continue the good work that you're doing. So I look forward to the people on this call letting me know if they're interested, as well as Rich, if there's anything in particular you think is you're hearing from your people might be a good way to go ahead. I'm more than happy to support that kind of activity.
Hey, Rich.
Thank you, Steve. In fact, I would love to work with a consortium in California on our academic cloud model, potentially. I think that that has a lot of legs. I think the work that Richard Grodiget has done with you know, others in the Silicon Valley market shows what's possible when we aggregate resources. The big challenge in my mind is we really need kind of like something that's willing to cross states, because I know that in many cases, and many here are from California, it's really hard to get economy of scale when you just stay within one state. Now, California is an exception. You guys have some incredible numbers you're trying to serve and then buying power. But, you know, my experience is getting economy of scale can be really hard. And then when it stays at one university and that's all they're focused on, or one college or one state, it's very hard to come up with models that are sustainable.
Well, you understand that here in California, we're experts at divide and conquer ourselves and self-sabotage. So we have our own, we may have the scale, but making that scale work is one of the biggest challenges we have. So sometimes we just have to float an idea. The one thing I've found in the years that I've been working in this particular role right here, so if you come up with a good idea and enough people are interested, then we can kind of get the ball rolling. But I do agree with the nationwide approach. We'd be happy to participate what you think you see gelling. I mean, obviously anything starts with a pilot that people like, and then from there, you get them tuned in. But yeah, be glad to talk more about the cloud approach that you're talking about.
Thank you, Steve. I don't know time-wise. I'm more than willing to stay around. I've got a meeting, but I'll be late to it. I'll stay around if anybody wants to talk after Nicole turns off the recording, and glad to answer any more questions if you have the time.
Yeah, I think we're over time right now, so we're going to wrap up the official recording part of this. And Nicole, are we able to keep the channel open for a little bit longer?
Yes, I can do that. Definitely.
Okay, so at this time, we'll go ahead and end the official point right here. This recording